So I'm practicing my speech quality. As you can see, I was coached for like 4 minutes, and I'm not trying to mumble. So Nir Eyal, you know, a lot of people talk about you have to solve a pain point and create an aspirin and blah, blah, blah. And I always thought that was really dumb. And so randomly one year I watched one of Nir's TED Talks, and I've always really been fascinated with the way he thinks about things and how to get people hooked on doing stuff. So without much further ado, Nir Eyal talking about how to get people hooked. Nir, welcome. Thank you for making time.
Thank you so much. Okay. Hey, everyone. Great to be here today. Let me do just a quick show of hands. Has anybody seen my video before or read my book? OK, so a few hands. Terrific. So fresh meat. Great. We can start from scratch. So if there's one thing we all have seen over the past few years is that these devices that we carry around with us have a tremendous impact on our day-to-day lives, on our day-to-day behaviors. And so what I've done over the past several years is to try and look at patterns, to try and figure out what is it about these products and services that we use every day that can so profoundly change people's day-to-day lives. And I looked at these companies that tend to follow a certain pattern. They start out as toys, as these nice-to-haves, and within the span of a few short years, maybe 5 to 10 years, they're changing the lives of hundreds of millions, if not billions of people, and they're making hundreds of millions, if not billions, of dollars. Who am I talking about? Who comes to mind? What's that? Apple? Who else? More recent. Uber, Snapchat. What else? What about Facebook? How many of you called Facebook back in 2006, 2007 when you first saw it? Did you really think it would be the behemoth it is today, worth what, $220 billion that company is worth, touching 1 in 7 people on the face of the earth? Unbelievable. There's other examples too, right? Instagram. Do you think Instagram would be as massive as it is today? Right? If you actually separated Instagram from Facebook, you know how much it would be worth on its own? $35 billion by one industry estimate. This little silly messaging service, right? These that you could post photos, big deal. Right? And there's others as well in the enterprise space. Companies like Slack, the fastest growing enterprise company in history. Right? They all have this very peculiar quality of being habit forming. And so what I've done over the past several years is to look at these patterns to try and figure out how these companies engineer, how do they manufacture these habits. I codified what I learned inside this book, Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, and I teach a class at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford and at the design school there. Now, I will give you one word of warning that usually I teach this material in a course, in a full course lecture, but today I have only about 30 minutes to cram about 250 pages of information in, so it's going to go by pretty fast, but I'll be available for questions afterwards as well, so, or you can reach out to me if you have further questions. So let's dive right in. What is a habit? A habit is nothing more than an impulse to do a behavior with little or no conscious thought. To do a behavior with little or no conscious thought. It's about half of what you do every day, day in and day out, is purely done out of habit, these behaviors that we do with little or no conscious thought. And I believe that we're on the precipice of an age where we can use habits for good, where we can help people live happier, healthier, more productive, more connected lives by helping them build healthy habits. So that's what I want to help you do today. Now, this pattern that I uncovered is called the hook. The hook is a part of your product, is an experience in your product, a design pattern that users follow that connects their problem to your solution with enough frequency to form a habit. So connecting your user's problem to your solution with enough frequency to form a habit. And what we find is that through successive cycles through these hooks, this is how customer preferences are changed, how tastes are formed, and how our habits take hold. These 4 basic steps that we find endemic to all sorts of habit-forming products. Let me walk you through these 4 steps. Every hook starts with a trigger. A trigger tells us what to do next. It prompts the action. And these triggers come in 2 types, 2 flavors. We have external triggers and internal triggers. By the way, I see lots of people taking pictures. That's terrific, no problem. I will actually give you a link to all these slides afterwards, so don't feel like you have to write everything down. So, yeah, you like that. I know she liked that a lot. I saw her face. Anyway, so external triggers are things that tell the user what to do next by giving you some piece of information, right? They tell you what to do next. Click here, buy now, play this. The information is in the trigger itself, okay? We in the product design community know all about external triggers. We see them every day. But what product people don't consider enough, and what turns out to be absolutely critical to forming these long-term habits, is creating an association with what's called an internal, come on now, internal trigger. Internal triggers are things that tell the user what to do, but the information for what to do next is not in the trigger, but instead it is informed through a memory in the user's head. So what we do in response to being in a certain place, a certain situation, a certain routine, when we're around certain people, and most frequently when we experience particular emotions, prompts us to take that next action with little or no conscious thought. The most frequent internal triggers are these emotions, but not just any emotion, negative emotions. So what we do when we're feeling bored or lonesome or indecisive or lost or fatigued, what we do when we experience these negative emotions dictates what we turn to next, right? Because these things are painful. We don't like these sensations, and we look for relief in the products we use. Some of the research that shows this is the case came to us from a study that found that people suffering from depression check email more. Now, why would that be? Why would people suffering from depression check email more? Well, it turns out that this study found that people suffering from clinical depression experience what psychologists call negative valence states. They feel down more frequently than the general population. And so what are they doing to boost their mood, to get out of that negative valence state? They're turning to their technologies. They're checking email more often than the rest of the population. And of course, we all do this to some degree, don't we? Let me ask you a question. What website do people go to or app do they check when they're feeling lonely? Facebook, of course. Where do we go when we're feeling unsure? Before we scan our brains to see if we know the answer, what do? We Google it, right. And what about when you're feeling bored? You know, between 2 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you have that big project you don't feel like working on right now. Where do you go? You go to YouTube, you go to Reddit, you check stock prices and sports scores and news sites to scratch this itch, this internal trigger of boredom. We don't like that sensation. Boredom feels bad. And so we look for solutions with the products we use. Now I see some of you nodding your heads and smiling and saying, yeah, I guess I do use these products and services prompted by these emotions, but what do we do with this? How do we build better products and services knowing about the importance of these internal triggers? How do we build better? Well, it comes down to fundamentally understanding your user's internal trigger. That it's very hard to build something that is habit forming without understanding what internal trigger you're going to attach to that occurs frequently in the user's life. It's amazing how many companies I consult with, and I go into the meeting, and they can tell me exactly the functional requirements of their product, but they have very little understanding about the psychological requirements of what their product is supposed to do for their user. What itch is it supposed to scratch throughout their day? Let's do a case study here. How many of you use Instagram? Oh, good. A lot of you. Terrific. What made Instagram such a habit-forming technology? Well, how did most people first find out about Instagram? What channels did you use to first find out about it? Anybody remember? What did you use? What channels? How'd you hear about it? Yeah, Facebook, Twitter, your friends, right? Somebody would post a photo on one of these sites of their Instagram photo, and there would be a call to action. There would be an external trigger that says, hey, check out my photo on Instagram. You click on that link. You install the app on your phone. Now it's on your home screen. And now you start getting these notifications from your friends, right? All external triggers prompting you to action, to open the app. Let's talk about Instagram's internal triggers for a second. Can I ask you a question? Did you say you use Instagram a lot? What was the last thing you took a picture of? Do you remember? No, just from your memory. What do you remember taking a picture of recently? Food. You took a picture of your dinner or lunch or something. And what's your name? Margaret. I am guessing that her plate of food did not say, hey, Margaret, take a picture of me with Instagram, right? How did Margaret know that when she's got this delicious plate of food in front of her, that she should take out Instagram? Well, there was an internal trigger association that told Margaret that when she sees something that she wants to capture, something that she has this fear of losing the moment that she wants to hold on to and remember for later or share with her friends, the solution to that fear of losing the moment, is Instagram. There was no explicit information telling Margaret what to do. She just had this habit of when I see something I want to capture, Instagram is a solution. Instagram wins. Now, when I talk about the moment, capturing the moment in the photography space, what other company comes to mind? Think 20, 30 years ago. Kodak, right? Do you guys remember the Kodak moment? Many of you were kids during when Kodak was a big company. But do you remember the Kodak moment, these commercials they always had on TV? The puppy dogs running through the grass, the kids who would someday leave the empty nest. And my personal favorite commercial was the one they always had of grandma blowing out perhaps her last birthday candles. This is a real commercial. I'm not making it up. You remember this commercial, right? You remember that grandma? Okay. Why did Kodak spend billions of dollars and almost 100 years teaching people about the Kodak moment? Well, they wanted to create a mental association in people's minds that when you see a moment like this, before it disappears into the ether forever, capture it with a Kodak camera, the Kodak moment. What took Kodak almost 100 years and billions of dollars, Instagram did with 12 people in 18 months by having users teach other users what the Instagram moment is for. Now, Instagram can do much more than the Kodak camera ever could because Instagram is also a social network. So the more users ran through the fourth step of Instagram's hook, the more they begin to associate it with other internal triggers. When they're feeling bored, lonesome, FOMO. What's FOMO? Fear of missing out. It's a real word in the Merriam-Webster dictionary as of 2 years ago, FOMO. The fear of missing out feels bad. It's a negative valence state. We don't like that sensation that we might be missing out. And the solution to that discomfort is this app that we turn to with little or no conscious thought. So the first step is figuring out what your user's internal trigger is. The next step is the action phase of the hook. The action phase is defined as the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward. The simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward. Let me show you some habit-forming products. Excuse me. And I want you to see just how simple these actions are. Something as simple as scrolling on Pinterest, right? Just that act of scrolling. Or searching on Google. Or what could be simpler than pushing the play button on YouTube? These extremely simple actions done to get a reward. Now, it turns out there's actually a formula to predict the likelihood of these individual acts, these individual behaviors. It comes to us from a researcher by the name of B.J. Fogg, who's at Stanford, who tells us that for any human behavior, we need three things. We need sufficient motivation, sufficient ability. Ability is how easy or difficult something is to do, and a trigger must be present. Think about how powerful this formula is. Any human behavior requires just three things. Your behavior, your kid's behavior, your spouse's behavior, your user's behavior, your customer's behavior only requires three things. First, motivation. Motivation is the energy for action, how much we want to do a particular behavior. Now, motivation is one of these areas of psychology that people have been arguing about for decades, but Fogg gives us these 6 basic levers that we can pull on to make someone more likely to do a particular behavior because we all seek pleasure and avoid pain. We seek hope and we avoid fear. We seek social acceptance and we avoid social rejection. So every bit of ad copy you've ever seen, every television commercial, every website text message you've seen that tries to encourage you to do a particular behavior uses one or more of these 6 levers of motivation. A lot more to be said about motivation, but for the sake of time, let's move on to the second part of B equals MAT. The A stands for ability. Ability is the capacity to do a particular behavior, how easy or difficult something is to do. And here again, we have these 6 levers that we can use to make a behavior more likely to occur by reducing how much time something takes, how much money something costs, how much physical effort is required. Brain cycles. This is a big one when it comes to technology products because it turns out the harder something is to understand, the less likely that behavior is to occur. And finally, social deviance says that we become more likely to do something when we see other people like us doing it. And finally, non-routine says that we become more likely to do something simply for the fact that we have done it before in the past, which is why habits are such a big deal. Because the best predictor of what you will do tomorrow is what you did yesterday. Why? Because the more we do a particular behavior, the easier it becomes, and therefore we're more likely to do it in the future. We increase our ability to do a behavior with practice. So Fogg puts together this graph that I think is very useful in a product development context. Let's say you're building a product, which I know most of you are, and for some reason users aren't doing what you want them to do. They're not clicking, they're not doing the behavior you're intending for them to do. What's going on? Don't they know your product is awesome and it's beautiful, you built this beautiful website and app? Why aren't they doing the intended behavior? Well, you can ask yourself, does the user have sufficient motivation? High motivation at the top of that y-axis, low motivation at the bottom. Does the user have sufficient ability? If something is easy to do, it's way over there. If something is hard to do, it's way over here. And if the user has sufficient motivation, sufficient ability, the behavior is easy enough to do, they cross that blue line, and when the trigger is present, the behavior will occur every single time. Any human behavior, offline, online, doesn't matter. That's all you need. Let's make this concrete. I want you to think to yourself about a time when a phone rang in your life and you did not pick up the phone. Give me a reason why you didn't pick up the phone. Just shout it out for me. What's that? You're tired. Terrific. So you heard the call, so you heard the trigger. Easy to pick it up. The phone was right there, but you lacked motivation. So you never crossed the threshold. What's another reason why you may not pick up a call? Okay, you may not want to talk to the person. That's also an example of motivation. What's another reason? Well, you're in my workshop, right? You're listening to me talk right now. And it'd be very difficult for you to get out of the aisle as to be that one jerk who's like, oh, no, I got to take a phone call. That's very hard to do. It takes a lot of ability to do that. So because even though you had plenty of motivation, you really want to pick up the call, you lack ability. Or let's say the phone is on the other side of the house. Even if you heard it ring, you're in the shower or something, it's difficult to get to the phone, so you don't pick up the call. What's one more reason why you may not pick up a call that has to do with the trigger? You don't hear it, right? Maybe the phone's on silent. So think about this. Even if you have plenty of motivation, you want to do the intended behavior, you wish you could pick up the call, even if the phone is right there next to you, very easy to pick it up, if you don't hear it ring, you will never do the behavior of picking up the phone. So every human behavior requires motivation, ability, and a trigger every single time. Okay, let's do another quick case study. Twitter users. How many people use Twitter? Okay, great. So you've seen this evolve over the years. Here's Twitter's homepage back in 2009. Here's Twitter's homepage in 2010. And here's Twitter's homepage 2015. What's changed when it comes to motivation, ability, and triggers? What do you see? What's different from 2015 than from 2009? What's changed? A lot less stuff, right? Look how much less stuff it was on the page in 2015 versus 2009. Look at all this, right? What was a trigger and why was a trigger? Those would take you to separate pages. How was a trigger? Watch a video is a trigger. Sign in is a trigger. Click here is a trigger. Click here is a trigger. And get started joins a trigger. That is a ton of cognitive load for the user to figure out what the hell it is you want them to do on this page. And by the way, in all three examples, what has Twitter always wanted people to do on this page? What's always been the intended behavior? Sign in or sign up. That's all Twitter wants people to do on this page. And what they figured out was, by removing the cognitive clutter, by making it easier for the user to figure out what you want them to do, people became more likely to do that behavior. They increased conversion rates, and they could start sending people through the 4 steps of their hook. Now, I know what somebody's thinking. Yeah, but Nir, back in 2009, people needed all this information, right? They needed the video, the what, why, how, right? Wrong. It turns out from my interviews for my book in the class, talking to the people who built this page, what they told me they discovered was that users actually never lacked motivation, right? Nobody came to Twitter by mistake. Nobody sat down at the computer and typed in twitter.com and said, oops, what's this, right? That happened never. It never happened by mistake. People were motivated to go to the page in the first place or they wouldn't come. They heard about it on Oprah. A friend told them about it. It was in the news. They had heard about it already. They wanted to check it out. And all Twitter had to do was to increase user ability by making the intended behavior easier to do. Okay? Now, after we figured out the user's internal trigger, the itch, we figured out the action and how to make it as simple as possible. Now it's time for the reward itself, for the user to get what they came for. When we talk about rewards, we have to start in the brain. And in particular, an area of the brain called the nucleus accumbens, which was first studied by 2 Canadian researchers by the name of Olds and Milner, who discovered when they implanted lab rats' brains with an electrode, and they plugged in that electrode to a little lever that the lab rat could press on, what they discovered was that the lab animals did so incessantly. They would click on this lever hundreds of times to stimulate this response in their nucleus accumbens. They would forgo food. They would forgo water. They would run across painful electrified grids just to continue to feel the sensation of stimulating their nucleus accumbens. In later experiments done on people, they observed similar results. That when people were given a little button to press on to send an electrical jolt to this part of the brain, what they discovered was that people would do this incessantly. Some people pushed on these buttons hundreds of times and had to have the machines forcibly removed from them to get them to stop pressing these buttons. Turns out we don't need electrodes to stimulate the nucleus accumbens, because your nucleus accumbens is activated every single day with things like luxury goods, sex, certain chemicals, junk food, and of course, right there in the center, technology. All of these things activate the very same part of your brain. Now, for years, much of the psychology community believed that the purpose of the nucleus accumbens was to stimulate pleasure, right? Why else would lab animals and later people incessantly click on these buttons to activate their nucleus accumbens if it wasn't because it felt good, right? Not exactly. What we now know is that the nucleus accumbens does not stimulate pleasure per se, but instead activates what we call the stress of desire. Wanting, craving. That's the role of this part of the brain, because what we now know that Olds and Milner never did was that the nucleus accumbens becomes most active in anticipation of the reward. But when we actually get the thing we want, when we've actually received the thing that's going to make us happy and make us feel good, that's when the nucleus accumbens becomes less active. So the way the brain gets us to act is by stimulating this itch that we seek to scratch. Many of you might feel this itch at times in your day. You ever have that itch to check your email, see what's going on Facebook, check ESPN.com, see what's going on in the stock market? That's your nucleus accumbens lighting up in anticipation of something you crave. Turns out that there is a way to supercharge this response, this stress of desire. Anybody want to know what it is? Anybody curious? I'm doing it to you right now. Turns out that the unknown is fascinating. Right? So when I took that long pause and I asked you a question with a question mark at the end, some of you perked up. What's this guy going to do next? What's going on? Why did he stop talking? Why is he looking at me funny and grinning? Right? So that uncertainty, that variable reward, we find is endemic to all sorts of habit-forming technologies. It comes from the classic work of B.F. Skinner. Many of you might remember Skinner from your Psych 101 class, the father of operant conditioning. Skinner took these pigeons, he put them in a box, he gave them a lever to peck at, and every time the pigeon pecked at this lever, originally, they would receive a reward. they would receive a little food pellet. And at first, the pigeon would peck at this lever whenever it was hungry. But then Skinner did something a little bit different. Skinner introduced some variability. So sometimes the pigeon would peck at the disc, at the lever, and nothing would come out. No reward. The next time the pigeon would peck at the disc, they would receive a reward. And what Skinner observed was that the rate of response, the number of times these pigeons pecked at the disc, increased when the reward was given on a variable schedule of reinforcement. So in all sorts, why does this happen? It happens because we now know that the nucleus accumbens becomes most active when these rewards are given on a variable schedule of reinforcement. So in all sorts of products that you find most habit-forming, the ones that capture your attention and won't let go, you will find one or more of these three variable reward types: rewards of the tribe, rewards of the hunt, and rewards of the self. Let me introduce these to you briefly. Rewards of the tribe are social rewards, things that feel good, have an element of variability, and come from other people. So this is all about the search for empathetic joy, feeling good because someone else feels good. Partnerships, cooperation, competition, all examples of rewards of the tribe. Best example I can think of online, social media. Right? So when I go onto a site like Facebook, I'm never quite sure what I'm going to see when I open that app. Right? What pictures did people post? What are the comments going to say? How many likes does something get? High degree of variability associated with using social media. Next is the search for rewards of the hunt. This is all about the search for resources. Rewards of the hunt stem from our primal search for food and other material possessions. And in modern society, we buy these things with money. And so when many people think of variable rewards, they think of slot machines, where the reward is what comes out of that gambling machine, right? There's uncertainty about what you might win, and that's part of what makes it habit-forming, if not all-out addictive. And we see the same exact dynamic, the same exact psychology online. When you think about the feed, why is it that so many products today have this feed? Why does everything online, everything on mobile have a feed today? You ever wonder that? Well, let's take a look at Twitter's news feed, for example, the Twitter timeline here. So when I open up Twitter and I look at the feed, maybe the first thing isn't interesting, the second thing isn't interesting, oh, but maybe the third or fourth is interesting. And what do I have to do to get more of that reward? What do I have to do? Just scroll. So that scrolling is exactly the same psychology, uses the exact same psychology as pulling on a slot machine. Exact same psychology at work. The search for these variable rewards, searching and never done searching for the next reward. Finally, rewards of the self. Rewards of the self are things that feel good, that have an element of variability, but don't come from other people and aren't about the search for material or information rewards. These are things that feel good in and of themselves, intrinsically pleasurable motivators. So the search for mastery, consistency, competency, and control. Best example I can think of online is gameplay. When I play Dots or Candy Crush or the Kardashian game, there's no material reward, right? You're not really winning anything. You're not even playing with other people. What you're getting from those experiences is the satisfaction of getting to the next level, the next accomplishment, the next achievement that feels good. And even if you say to me, look, Nir, I don't really play these games. This doesn't really apply to me. I bet you play this game every day, right? Checking those unread messages so that you can clear them away. Finishing the to-dos on your to-do list. Or the one that always gets me is looking at your home screen and seeing that one app that has the notification that you just have to open so you can clear it away are all examples of these variable rewards of the self, the search for mastery, consistency, competency, and control. Which finally brings me, the purpose of the variable rewards phase is to give the user what they want, to scratch their itch, and yet have this bit of mystery involved with what they might find the next time they use the product, the next time they might open the app. Which finally brings me to the last step of the hook, the investment phase. The investment phase is where the user puts something into the product in anticipation of a future reward, a future benefit. Not about immediate gratification. That's what the action phase is for. The investment phase is for a future benefit. And the point of the investment phase is to increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook in two ways. The first way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass is by loading the next trigger, something the user does on their own accord to bring them back in the future. So for example, when I use WhatsApp and I send someone a message, there's no immediate gratification, right? I don't get any kind of immediate reward. What I'm doing is by sending that message, by investing in the platform and sending a message, what I'm doing is loading the next trigger because I'm likely to get a reply. And that reply comes coupled with that little jewel icon there, which is an example of an external trigger, which prompts me to go through the hook once again. So the first way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass is by loading the next trigger. The next way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook is by storing value. And this is a big deal. One of the reasons I love working in technology, as opposed to working with things in the physical world like these chairs and your phones and your laptops, all of these things in the physical world, they depreciate. They lose value with wear and tear, right? But habit-forming technologies should do the opposite. Habit-forming products should get better with use. They should appreciate in value. And they do this because of this principle of stored value. So for example, the more content I add into iTunes, the more valuable it becomes as my one and only music library. The more data I give to Mint.com or any number of other services, the more data I provide these platforms, the more valuable they become. I can do more with those services, the more data I hand over and I invest in the platform. The more followers I accrue on Twitter, for example, the more followers I have, the better that platform is as a way for me to reach my audience. So that if Twitter tomorrow were to send out an email that said, hey, look, Twitter's no longer free, you're going to have to start paying for it, who's more likely to pay? Someone with 10 followers or 10,000 followers? Of course, it's going to be the person with 10,000 followers. They've stored this value in the form of their follower count. And finally, reputation. Reputation is a form of stored value that users can literally take to the bank. Because my reputation count on sites like eBay or Airbnb or TaskRabbit defines what I can charge for my goods and services. And how easy is it for me to leave one of these platforms after I've invested all this effort in my reputation? Kind of hard to do, right? Makes it sticky to leave. So that's it. The 4 fundamental steps of the hook model: the trigger, action, reward, investment, and that through successive cycles through these hooks, this is how user preferences are shaped, how tastes are formed, and how these habits take hold. So that was a lot of information. I realized I had only a little bit of time to cram in a lot. There's a lot more information in the book, but here's the most important slide. Here's the fundamentally most important slide of the presentation, the 5 questions that you need to be able to answer if your business model depends on building a habit. Number 1, what's the user's itch? Number 2, what's the external trigger that brings your user to the product? Number 3, what's the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward? Number 4, is the reward fulfilling and yet leaves the user wanting more? And then finally, what's the bit of work done to increase the likelihood of the next pass? Before I go, there's one more thing I'd like to discuss real quick, and that is the morality of manipulation. I know what that nervous laughter is about. That some of you during my presentation were thinking to yourselves, you know, is this kosher? Is this okay to do to people, to use their hidden psychology to change their behaviors? Is that all right to do? If you had that response, bravo. I believe that is the appropriate, humane response to learning about the power of changing people's behaviors through the psychology of habits. Because let's face it, anytime we are changing people's behavior to meet our ends in mind, that, my friends, is a form of manipulation. Because the products we're building here in Silicon Valley, these are the kinds of things people take to bed with them every night. It's the first thing people reach for in the morning before they say hello to their loved ones. And as Ian Bogo said, our technology is quite possibly becoming the cigarettes of this century. So what responsibility do we have as product designers, as entrepreneurs, as investors, as engineers? What responsibility do we have to use the psychology of habits for good? Well, I encourage you to pick one of the world's problems. You know, that is one thing that we have no shortage of. To help people live happier, healthier, more productive, more connected lives by using the psychology of habits for good. I encourage you to build on the words of Gandhi. I encourage you to build the change you wish to see in the world. Thank you very much. One thing. I promised you the slides, so do me a favor here. Can everybody lift up their phones for me? Lift up your phones high. Great. I want to get a picture. Okay, no problem. So what I did here was two things. One, I wanted to get a picture of you all, your lovely audience. And two, I just increased your ability. Wait, can you put that slide back up real quick? Two, I increased your ability to take the intended behavior, which is to go to that URL that they'll put back up in just a second. There we go. Oh, almost. It's opinion2.us. There you will see a very short survey. It's only about 5 questions. Would love to see what you thought of the presentation. I'm constantly tweaking it. Take you all 30 seconds to do the presentation. And then as soon as you click submit, you'll be taken to my SlideShare page where you can have all the slides you just saw. That's the reward, obviously. So I practice what I preach. Thank you very much.